I knew the HOA had finally pushed too far the moment I stepped outside at dawn and saw the new road they bulldozed straight through my wetlands. Not beside them, not around them, through them, slicing through the marsh like a scar. They had ignored my warnings, dismissed every environmental report, and laughed off the state guidelines as overly dramatic. But even then, I didn't expect nature to come for them so quickly or so violently, because the storm that hit 3 weeks later didn't just wash away their illegal road, it erased it overnight. And when the sun rose the next morning, the project the HOA bragged would raise property values was nothing but shattered concrete, uprooted signs, and a 50-foot crater where their $1 million shortcut used to be. And somehow, they still tried to blame me. The wetlands behind my house were never just a patch of soggy land to me. They were a living, breathing ecosystem, one of the last green pockets in our town that hadn't yet been paved, drained, or developed into some sterile square of concrete. When I bought my property 15 years ago, those wetlands were what sealed the deal. In the spring, flocks of migratory birds would settle there, painting the sky with wings. In the summer, fireflies blinked and danced over the grass like tiny lanterns. And year-round, the marsh acted like a natural sponge, absorbing seasonal rain before it could flood our streets. It wasn't just a pretty view. It was a quiet miracle of nature, doing exactly what nature had designed it to do. But of course, none of that mattered to the HOA. Our HOA board was the type that believed every problem could be fixed with asphalt, fences, or threats printed on laminated paper. They were obsessed with uniformity, order, and appealing visual cohesion. Anything natural trees, untrimmed shrubs, native grasses they saw as messy, unproductive, or bad for the neighborhood aesthetic. For years, I'd watched them slowly chip away at the community's greenery, replacing gardens with gravel, old oaks with decorative shrubs, and natural walkways with concrete paths. But even with all that, I never imagined they would have the nerve to invade my wetlands. It started subtly, as HOA overreaches usually do. First came the surveyors, walking around with clipboards and reflective vests, marking the edges of the property with bright orange flags. When I asked one of them what they were doing, he said they were assessing possible improvements. Improvements, the HOA's favorite euphemism for destruction. A few days later, I received an email in the most nauseatingly cheerful tone I'd ever read. They were proposing a new community access road to enhance mobility and convenience for the neighborhood. And guess where they wanted to build it? Right through the wetlands. I immediately replied with concerns. Long emails, detailed information, links to environmental studies, legal codes, everything. After all, the wetlands weren't just delightful scenery, they were federally protected. But the HOA dismissed my objections like they were nothing more than annoyances from a cranky neighbor with too much free time. They insisted the wetlands were not officially classified as significant enough to restrict development, which was absurd. I had the documents, they didn't bother to read them. The first formal HOA meeting on the matter was a nightmare. Picture a room full of people pretending to understand ecology while actually believing that water drainage works like a cartoon mud puddle, just something you can pave over and call it a day. They waved off every fact I presented. They said the project would be minimally invasive. They claimed they had hired experts. But when I asked for their environmental impact assessment, they admitted they hadn't actually done one. They just didn't think it was necessary. That was the beginning of the end. For them, within 2 months, bulldozers rolled in. Heavy machinery shook the ground every morning at sunrise. The sound was constant metal scraping stone, engines roaring, trees snapping. Watching them slice open the earth was like watching a slow death. They dug deep trenches to lay down gravel and compacted soil, trying to force a structure where nature had shaped fluidity. They tore through the cattails, drained shallow pockets of water, and filled natural basins with dirt. I tried everything: calls to the county, filing complaints with environmental agencies, even sending drone footage to a local news station. But bureaucracy was slow and the HOA moved fast. The workers weren't the problem. They were just following orders. But the board members, especially Carl, the HOA president, acted like they were conquering new territory. Carl would walk around the site with his hands on his hips, sunglasses on, nodding like some self-proclaimed visionary. "This is going to make the neighborhood really shine," he said once while I was within earshot. Shine? They were destroying our natural flood buffer, and all he cared about was shaving 2 minutes off someone's drive out of the subdivision. The moment the road was finished, I knew it was a ticking time bomb. The wetlands had taken centuries to form. The natural flow of water had found its own paths, carving its own rhythms. And the HOA's road cut straight across the central channel, the place the wetlands funneled overflow during heavy rainfall. Even if they didn't care about wildlife, basic hydrology should have been enough to convince them this was a terrible idea. But arrogance blinds people, and arrogance, when facing nature, always loses. The warning signs started early. First, the road began to sag in the center. The HOA blamed settling and brought in contractors to compact the soil again. Then cracks appeared along the outer edges. They patched them with asphalt. Weeks later, after a mild rain, puddles collected along the sides. Rather than admit the wetlands were reclaiming their territory, they installed small drains that led nowhere. They literally built drains into a marsh. It would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Then came the storm. Meteorologists predicted heavy rainfall, but nothing catastrophic. Just a strong seasonal downpour, the kind the wetlands were designed to handle naturally. The kind they had handled every year since, before the subdivision even existed. But this time, the wetlands were wounded. Their channels were blocked, their natural flow severed by the HOA's shiny new improvement. So when the rain arrived, the water had nowhere to go. The storm rolled in overnight. I remember the first thunderclap shaking my windows. The rain hammered down in sheets thick, relentless, drumming on the roof like fists. I watched from my back porch as the first pools formed across the marsh, rising rapidly. Within an hour, the water was higher than I had ever seen it. It pressed against the edges of the road like a growing beast testing its cage. By midnight, I heard the low groan, the sound of pressure building, where pressure wasn't meant to be. At 2 a.m., nature snapped. The water broke through with a roar like the burst of a dam. A torrent surged across the road, ripping asphalt from the ground as if it were paper. Segments of concrete split apart, buckled, and vanished beneath churning brown water. Mud geysers erupted where the soil collapsed. The entire road, all 1.2 miles of it, shook violently as the earth reclaimed what had always been its own. By dawn, the $1 million project the HOA had boasted about was gone. Not damaged. Gone. I walked outside at sunrise and stopped in my tracks. Where the road had been was now a jagged, muddy canyon. Chunks of pavement lay scattered like broken teeth. Their decorative signs announcing enhanced neighborhood access floated in the wreckage like sad little tombstones. It was quiet except for the soft trickle of water returning to its natural path, as if the wetlands were sighing, relieved. I wasn't the only one out early. Carl arrived minutes later, jaw dropped, face pale, hands shaking. He stomped through the mud, screaming into his phone, demanding emergency contractors, repairs, explanations, anything. Nothing he said mattered. It was over. Nature had delivered its verdict. At the emergency HOA meeting later that day, the board was in full meltdown mode. They couldn't understand how this happened. "We followed the plan," they insisted. But when the contractor finally spoke, he bluntly said, "You built over a drainage channel." This was predictable. The look on Carl's face was priceless, the mixture of disbelief and rage of a man who had finally realized his arrogance had consequences. Then came the moment that nearly made me laugh out loud. Carl turned to me and said, "You should have warned us. You knew this land better than anyone." Warn them? I nearly choked. I had sent emails, attended meetings, provided documents, filed reports short of chaining myself to a bulldozer. I had done everything except scream. And even then, they wouldn't have listened. The room exploded when I reminded them of that fact. Repairs were impossible. Engineers estimated the road would cost triple to rebuild. And even then, it would fail again because the wetlands couldn't be tamed. The HOA insurance refused to cover damages since the board had ignored environmental regulation warnings. The county opened an investigation. Fines were levied. Board members resigned. The wetland road project became a local cautionary tale. As for me, I still walk the wetlands every morning. They're healing slowly, beautifully. Nature always finds a way. The cattails have returned, the birds as well. And every time I see the new grass sprouting from the ruins of the demolished road, I'm reminded of a truth the HOA learned the hard way.